Members, thank you so much. I want to thank Senator Birdwell for working on this. Obviously, we want safer communities for our constituents and our families. And as the senator from the border, I'll be the first one to tell you, just as we heard from our colleague Senator Hinojosa, that we do need border security. We absolutely do need border security. But I think where we disagree is on how we're securing the border. And I think that the how matters, especially to our constituents on the border, especially to our local law enforcement that is on the front line, our local governments that are on the border, and our local businesses. So while I believe we need border security, I disagree on how we're attempting border security, how it's laid out on in HB7. You know, from the border, we, as border members, we get perspective. We hear from our constituents. We hear from the constituents who live and work and raise families on the border. And what I've heard, at least in my district, is that this bill has the potential to create a lot of problems that it seeks to solve, or more problems, rather. The first problem is, I believe, that it's unconstitutional based on the decision from Arizona versus United States. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot create or enforce immigration laws. And after the discussions that we've had in committee and on the floor, the concern is that that's what this bill would do. I think our border communities know and understand the unique needs that we have. And the bottom line is that we need Congress to pass legislation. I was just reading a resolution from Senator Perry. And we need the federal government to enhance border security. We need the federal government to provide a modernized, a more permanent solution to our broken immigration system. We need the federal government to do both, while also addressing the high demand for illegal drugs in this country. We also have to recognize that the U.S. demand for drugs is incentivizing and financing the cartels. We can't ignore that. We have to do both. But if the state of Texas is going to do border security, if we're going to go into the business of border security, I think it's important for us to evaluate what's working and what's not working. And the truth is that over the past several years, the state of Texas has spent billions on our border security efforts. And while we're spending billions, separate and apart from what the federal government is spending, illegal border crossings and fentanyl seizures are at an all-time high. Before we deploy a whole other unit to the border, I think we've got to figure out as a state, how effective have we been with the thousands of troopers and thousands of guardsmen and women deployed under Operation Lone Star? We've got to ask these tough questions. And according to testimony in the committee, the border force is not intended to be a force multiplier. We had this discussion. And this bill is doing more, from my perspective, of the same. We're adding more boots to the ground. And if we're going to do more of the same, members, I think we can expect to see more of the same. If the state's going to do border security, we should be asking, not telling, we should be asking border communities what we need. This is a very top-down approach. So I think we need to look at investing in modern strategies that are effective. I think we need to look at more technology. I think we need to look at fiber optics. We can build a digital wall. We can build a smart wall with real-time data. We can invest in our ports of entry, where we know most of the contraband is crossing through trucks and through vehicles. We can also invest in our local border law enforcement. These are the folks that understand the community, the culture, the language, the routes, the stash houses. They're the ones on the front lines. We should also invest, and we've heard Senator Hinojosa talk a lot about this, invest in our local judicial systems. These are the people on the front line. We, as border members, are on the front line. So let's do something. We should definitely do something about the southbound flow of guns to Mexico, because, members, the cartels are literally being armed by guns that are illegally taken to Mexico from Texas. And I feel that the bill falls short on these things. Finally, with the creation of the border unit, I'm concerned that law-abiding border residents who are predominantly Latino are going to be subject to potential harassment, pretextual traffic stops by this new border force. And we've heard on the floor the stories. We've heard about the concerns. We've heard the data and the statistics. It's not speculation. Since the launch of Operation Lone Star and DPS deploying thousands of troopers to the border, we have not seen fewer illegal crossings. But what we have seen, what we can calculate, are the traffic citations for minor infractions in border counties that have skyrocketed by an alarming 1,000%. That's our folks going to HEB, dropping off their kids at school, going to baseball practice. That affects our quality of life. And I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that we are immensely grateful for DPS and grateful for the members of the Guard for their personal sacrifices and their resolve, for their service. They're being separated from their families. They come home to do these deployments. A lot of them are losing their small businesses, their jobs. And they're doing what we're asking them to do, but we still need safeguards. I think we need updated policies to reflect the current concerns. Yesterday, during our discussion, I brought up the data about Hispanic drivers being stopped by DPS. And despite DPS finding less contraband in cars with Hispanic drivers than any other race, we also, when you look at our border communities, we're experiencing more DPS high-speed pursuits that risk injury to persons and property in our communities. And if chases continue at the current rate in El Paso, we're going to see a 475% increase of high-speed pursuits this year compared to last year. And 90% of these chases are being initiated because of misdemeanor traffic violations. In 2021, at least 30 people, including innocent bystanders, were killed in high-speed pursuits by DPS along the border. And in that same year, 23 deaths were connected to U.S. Border Patrol pursuits in the entire southern border. That's from California to Texas. So we can see that there's a problem with these high-speed chases with DPS. And these traffic stops and deadly high-speed pursuits are only going to continue if we're adding more to the border region. More of these folks in my community, in our community, with this emboldened border force unit. And I think, members, that if this was happening in everyone else's districts, I'm positive everybody would stand up for their district and say, this is not right. And that's what I think a lot of the border members are here to say today, that we are negatively impacted by this number of police officers that are in our community. So members, respectfully, for these reasons, we've had a long debate yesterday, late last night. Again, I think there are ways to do border security that's smarter, that's cheaper, in many ways better than what the federal government is doing. And I look forward to working with Senator Birdwell to implement some of those smart practices down the road. But on this bill, members, respectfully, I'll be voting no. Thank you, Mr. President.